Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Music Fastball by Standard Innovation. I'm Sam Morey, and today I'm joined by Ryan Hamilton, who brings 18 years of experience across catalog management, licensing, and monetization. We're going to focus on two areas where we consistently see missed revenue for music investors. First, how to optimize your route to market, so you're not just accepting the status quo, but actually maximizing licensing income and retaining commercial leverage. And second, how to track, enforce, and monetize music consumption across social platforms, turning what has historically been invisible or unenforced into a revenue stream. Let's jump in with our first topic. Ryan, great to see you today. Thanks for joining us. And question number one. So, from a commercial perspective, how do music investors typically operate today with labels and publishers? And what terms do they typically operate within?
I think on a high level, these as soon as an asset is purchased, the historical deals are likely staying in place. Whether if we're talking about publishing, they have a likely an administrator. It's very unlikely that a typical just music investor would have an admin structure in house, or maybe something very small. May have a royalties team or something like that that's monitoring income. For the most part, there'll be a lot of publishers, sub publishers on the publishing side versus a distributor or multiple distributors, depending on the rights you have on the master's sound recordings.
A lot of those terms are typically like set up from when that artist had like previously like made an agreement with that label or publisher. So typically, like, what are the kind of like standard terms that you would expect to see, and like where are the opportunities within that?
Yeah, we'll see, multi-year deals where it's anywhere from like 2 to 3 or 5 years. We'll see auto renews in there, which is something obviously to look out for, especially if you have the ability to make some changes. We see some label licensing deals that are likely that could be in perpetuity, which I think is a call out as a pain point that I think that is likely overlooked during the acquisition phase. Do you like what is your accountability is kind of the question I ask clients. And accountability, whether or not it's, do you want to be passive or active? And that's really where it comes down to. You're going to see, hey, maybe I have a deal that's rolling that I can move right now. Maybe there's a deal that I can't leave for 2 to 3 years. Maybe there's something that we're stuck with in perpetuity. Um, and ultimately, that's where relationships come in play, is to exactly like how how invested you are going to be with artists, with the labels, with managers in general, or with the admins, so that you can actually be proactive, even if you don't have the ability to make any adjustments.
Yeah, and this obviously, I think this could be quite a complex area because a lot of investors have a lot of different catalogs, and by definition, you've therefore got agreements and broadly different contracts with a lot of different labels and publishers across the board. We hear a lot about, through the due diligence process, legals are reviewed, but sometimes, actually carrying that through into operations like takes a little bit longer, or there's a few kind of unknowns once it lands. That shouldn't be the case, but sometimes that happens, through the process. But there's obviously the optimization that people can do in terms of, again, I guess at an economies of scale level, they can, I guess, make an agreement with the particular label or publisher, and then obviously then track and try and move those different deals in. That takes a lot of management though, right? I mean, how do you typically tackle those types of things?
Yeah, I mean, if you have many, many distributors that you're talking about multiple different rates, multiple different territories, it is super complicated. Um, I think that sometimes consolidating is likely a really interesting concept of what you can actually get underneath one roof. I believe that having the right distributor is really very important, because not every album or catalog is kind of created equal, in a way that maybe you want more marketing support here, maybe you want to be a little bit, maybe this is a little bit passive, um, in terms of what you're able to do with the rights that you have. But you got to look at all these distributors also from the perspective of what are the rates that they may be able to leverage that actually can give you immediate uplift. um, and interesting enough, like there's some catalogs on the opposite side that are so massive, and they have such a big team around them that you don't even want to touch them. You want to leave them where they're at.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and so I do think that there's this you have to really, not everything, it may make sense to get everything under one roof. It may make sense to kind of parse out some of these other deals or these other catalogs into their own distribution networks. Um, but I do think it gets complicated, but I think it's all about your ability to, account manage, to be able to actually speak with these people month to month. And if you're from my experience, I think that the passive distributors are not necessarily the right fit for these types of acquired assets, because your goal is to ultimately optimize them and do whatever you can to keep them, sustainable, as opposed to a natural decline in revenue.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we've seen a lot is a lot of the different like music investors will have a different approach. So some will do a lot of the marketing themselves. They'll kind of just want to have an admin deal, I guess, or maybe do admin in house. But certainly from a label, they'll want to kind of optimize that as much as possible. But they kind of take on the burden of like I guess, the marketing side of things. Different funds will actually want the opposite, and they'll want to do that and kind of outsource that entirely. And I think the interesting point you raise, Ryan, is that as you say, there's loads of options out there, and you don't have to just go with like the status quo as you've kind of talked about. As you know, for different catalogs, there's different ways you can like work it in partnership with other
Mhm.
parts of the music industry, right?
Absolutely. I think that the one thing that you'll see in historical deals in general that might be a red alarm or something to really like look into before you actually decide to move forward is whether or not there is exclusivity or non-exclusivity. Especially if you're either moving to a new partner, a new admin, um, or a new distributor, that ability to be able to operate as a partnership, I think, is really important. Red tape obviously slows things down. It depends. My team, our business development people, right? Like, we like to move fast. We like to close deals. We don't want to deal with all the red tape. So I like the ability to partner up and be very transparent and supportive with my partners I support. But at the same time, I think that having the non-exclusive right to pull certain pieces out, for example, licensing on the digital side, or commercial sync, is really nice. You want to be able to procure your own deals if possible. You want to be able to procure your own commercial licenses as possible, because if you're able to do that through marketing or through your website, through anything that you're doing proactively, whether it's through social media or whatnot, that you actually gain the uplift yourself, as opposed to giving a piece, that percentage away to your administrator.
Yeah, and obviously, like a lot of these investors are getting like they're kind of getting quite big now, right? There's quite a lot of assets under management,
Oh yeah.
certainly at the top end. So, I think that gives them a very different type of, I guess, negotiating power, like altogether. Like, let's say, for example, like Primary Wave, now they're part of Cobalt. That obviously brings a whole load of like different like possibilities for them. But funds of a similar size actually there could be like opportunities for them to explore those types of benefits themselves. I think there's probably two layers. There's
Mhm.
relationships with like publishers, labels, and distributors, and then the level above that is their relationships with DSPs like Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, and the types of deals that are done at that level. Like, give us a view of how a music investor could, I guess, elevate themselves alongside some of these um, labels and publishers, or to be able to negotiate directly. Like, how could they do that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you have those non-exclusive rights, with your admin, or you're doing administration yourself, um, there are obviously opt-in portals. If you don't have something that's on demand, like an on-demand catalog, a relatively A-list artist, or a very sizable uh, group of works that can demands that relationship. I think that not everyone can demand that relationship, but if you can, one, having those relationships or direct deals can actually, uplift a few things. One, getting that immediate income. I mean, I think a lot of times when you're working with an administrator, you're generating income on a quarterly basis. You're not necessarily participating in advances or minimum guarantees. Obviously, something you probably could negotiate with your admin. But most of the time, I think that it's a natural royalty, you know, uh, like inbound income. I personally love doing direct deals. I have great relationships with, mostly every, music tech platform out there. Um, and I think that there is, above and beyond just monetary value, there's great value in, like, what type of partnerships can you do? What kind of marketing activation can they provide you? And that allows you to really uplift the catalog in the most important places, which are all the social media platforms. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so I do think that there is a level of, hey, I just purchased a very, very valuable catalog and I have the right to license it. I think going directly is likely the best move. And if you're unable to, then maybe that's part of your strategy in how you work with your admin, or maybe you kind of team up with a partner like myself or another consultant that ultimately has those relationships that can kind of open that door for you, and see how we can kind of build a stronger relationship for the investor.
I think like all these things, there's a lot of data that's required to, or at
Oh
least
yeah,
like insights required to inform you of what, where to focus. And I think there's a lot of what we hear a lot about contracts that kind of differ, artist to artist and publisher to publisher, and getting devils in the detail with all these things. And it's not an insignificant task, is it? You've got to comb through all the contracts, you've got to have a clear position, you've got to understand where there's overlap with certain agreements, where you can kind of take a few different catalogs to one label, and have a conversation, accordingly. So it's about proactive management, isn't it? A lot of this.
sure. And honestly, like, I can go negotiate a fantastic deal, but if our database of publishing works is not enriched through, and through ISRCs, whether, we're not actually adding more to our database, we're not working with a great YouTube partner, we don't have a matching partner, we're not leveraging Luminate data, we're not leveraging our pan-European licensing partners that are all doing matching. Everyone's doing matching worldwide at some level. Your team does matching, right? So how do we get all that matching getting into our database? Because if we're not delivering all those ISRCs for this fantastic, deal I just struck for you,
Yeah,
then now you're not recouping on that deal, and you want to have that longevity with that client. So if they're going to invest in you and your catalog, you got to make sure that you're investing inside of your database, because that's what's ultimately going to get you that return, and make sure that, you know that ultimately you're taking your best swing.
yeah,
It's a little bit easier on the master side because it's usually, one ISRC you own, as opposed to,
yeah, yeah.
as an example, a client of mine has Pete Townsend's. We have 95,000 ISRCs in our database for 400 pieces of works.
Wow.
It's a different ballgame. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's kind of shows you that like this being able to get to the level of like negotiating these types of things directly comes from like reps, right? You got to do the work. You got to put the reps in to kind of take it to that level.
Yeah, I think that, I try to make sure that I'm a great account manager on both sides. Like, I'm trying to help my clients, but I'm also making sure that, I'm trustworthy, and I'm making sure that, our industry is very interesting now, where things are being bought and sold constantly. Things are moving around. Like, how do you give some of these platforms, like, how do you get them comfortable with the idea of, whether they give you a minimum guarantee, or they give you an advance, or they give you something that can actually boost your um your ability to just be seen on the platform in general. Um, how do you do that? That they're going to put the effort. The effort's not going to be lost. I think that that's something that I constantly am working on both sides of, and I think that that's probably the hardest part about my gig. But I enjoy it, and I do think that everyone's got to operate in good faith at the end of the day. It's not just about, like, getting this immediate income so that the investor can create more value for their assets. Um, that's ultimately that's their goal. My goal is to make sure that everyone feels like everyone's trusted and doing the right things.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it just shows that like taking that kind of proactive approach, it really can sort of make a big difference over a long period of time.
Oh, I could do one more really quick. I mean, as an example, you know, historical deal, you look at it right now, it's on a rolling, doesn't have a minimum guarantee. It could be earning $1 million a year for you. You're at 10%. Well, By the way, there's multiple players in the ball game, right? So you're in a situation where you want to have a great relationship with the current team of whoever you're working with, but there may be other players involved that you want to just shop around and do the negotiation. It is a lot of work to move things around, which is, I think that's what you always have to
Yeah,
think. Do
yeah,
I am I prepared to do this, and do I have the team to do this? That's the biggest thing, is like, do I have the people in place to actually make this move if I want to get that 10% down to 7, right? If I want to, um, or what will the partner do to help you move it around? I mean, I think that I personally look at historical deals as a very important place for optimization. Anything that's likely 3 to 5 years old, at least in music tech, likely should be blown up. Whether and not in a bad way, just ultimately like, hey, we need to sit at the table and make sure that everything is up to date, because chances are there's a lot of rights that maybe that were negotiated on their end that they aren't capturing now, which is ultimately not allowing you to make the most that you can on the specific platforms as well. So,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, we hear that a lot. Yeah.
yeah,
There's loads of like little terms in there that like can still be in there from, historic
yeah,
agreements around packaging and all sorts that, is kind of all money on the table really in a lot of ways, isn't it? So um
yeah.
the second bit we're going to look at today was around copyright infringement. That was kind of a little bit hard to track before. Right, I think you've done a lot in this space. Using some third party platforms that can track this kind of stuff. Give us an example of like how that works and like how the types of results you've got from that.
Yeah. So one thing that we always look at from a digital licensing perspective is this gray area that has traditionally not been super helpful to publishers, especially because of the millions and millions of ISRCs that could be associated to a specific sound or popular song or works. Um, wh- when brands are using, posting UGC content, yeah, they're supposed to go directly. It's non-commercial use. So take a step back. The deal that we typically do on, directly as a publisher are all non-commercial uses. Meaning, me and you as an individual person can post to our socials, no big deal. But as soon as a brand actually does it, that becomes a commercial use because you're promoting an actual product, which should trigger an actual synchronization commercial sync license. You talk to my sync team, not me.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so brands, I think, not even it's just lack of education, I think, for the most part. Most of it's not malicious. I don't think any of it's really super malicious. And maybe, for a very long time, at least the last few years, since, maybe the last 5 or 6, since it's really been really popular to kind of have an organic or a social media account that actually can promote your product, using music has always been that helpful push. And you
yeah,
couldn't, and it's too big, it's too vast to be able to go in and look and say, okay, who's using my music? Um, and most recently, there's been multiple partners that have kind of appeared that have been able to actually like create these amazing tools that can take all of your MLC database, take all of your data, plug it into their system, and really focus in on those Fortune 100, Fortune 500, and bigger brands, and just see the uses. Now, that is, it's definitely opened up a can of worms for me, and there's a lot of complexities in terms of how you actually approach doing it. It's not too simple to be like, all right, cool, let's go approach them and get our money. There's usually a lot of different players involved, especially on the publishing side. You could be going after 5%. Maybe you have an owner who owns 100%, but there's multiple admins involved. So there's a lot of these like tricky things that go in place. But I think that just the transparency more recently has shown me that this is an area that maybe it's short term, because maybe it's the next couple of years we're able to go and actually capture infringement from the past, where eventually I think these brands who probably have lost the battle, um, and didn't know, maybe they had an intern posting it thinking like this is a really cool thing to do, not even knowing.
the problem with sync in some respects is it's quite complicated to kind of get in place, isn't it? To your point around it being 5% you might be going after. That's also from a sync perspective, you've got to get agreements for everyone to get the license degree. Yeah,
Everyone's been trying to solve this, right? Like, so I know that even, some of the bigger social media platforms have presented to publishers, hey, let's create some sort of rate card scenario, which ultimately does not work for the sync community. We're not going to cannibalize like a very popular song so that
yeah,
so users can freely, post. There are definitely commercial libraries that exist, like within some of these subsets. Most of them are not opting in their bigger hits. Whereas now we're finding a lot of uses for that. And we're talking anywhere from $5,000 to 150 to $250,000 infringement cases, depending on how often you use it or how long it's been sitting on the platform.
So give us an example, Ryan, of like what's the process of these kind of
Mhm.
platforms that can track the usage? Like walk us through an example of that kind of end to end.
In terms of the companies that are finding this for me, or the
Um,
DSP.
so so yeah, you've kind of matched your catalog into their platform. They've
Yep.
identified a brand that's used, maybe inadvertently used one of your songs in an ad, let's say a number of times. What is the kind of process that you kind of typically
Sure.
follow?
I don't want to pick on TikTok, so I'm going to pick on Meta now, just to use them as an example. They're great.
Sure.
I mean, their team's great, but ultimately, we'll do the deal directly with, say, Meta. Um, Non-exclusive, non-exclusive deal, non-commercial deal, and they've done the matching. Our music is cleared on their platform. Great. They do their best to take things down that do not seem to be, within the guidelines of the licenses that they have. There obviously are going to be gaps. It's very hard for an individual publisher to go into their system and actually go look around for this stuff. You could never do that, right? So that's
Yeah.
that's the DSP side. They're trying their best, and they're honestly pushing things forward constantly, to try to solve for that. Now, now we have some of these super smart, like tech guys that are coming on board, being like, "Hey, like we're going to solve this on behalf of a lot of these different companies." So they're developing those tools to actually say this is actually living on your platform. So
So
yeah,
say you find one, okay. So like
yep,
brand A, it's used your song.
yep.
What do you do?
First thing I do is I say, "Oh, this is an interesting one. Look at all the views. Let's see how many people have actually, you know, how big is the brand, right? I'm not gonna ultimately want to go after a small coffee company. It's not really worth. I don't think anyone wants to do that. But ultimately, we're looking at a big brand that should know better. How popular was this? Did they boost it? Was it run on ads?
Yeah.
From there, I go right to my sync team, or I'll pull up the sync data. You have to be in partnership with your sync team or the sync teams you work with, because they're the ones who have the relationship. So not only are we being very careful about this scenario, there's two options. One is, hey, first you want to find out, was this ever licensed? The answer is no. Okay, well, do you have a relationship with these people? Because sometimes it's not worth kind of going down the legal route to go get some money, especially if there's a really strong relationships that we currently have in place. And I'll say, at that point, I'll work with a plan with the sync team to, let's go out there and think of something creative now. Let's go reach out to directly, hey, this is likely a mistake,
Yeah.
but you didn't license this, so this would have cost you this much money. Let's work this out. And maybe there's a bigger deal at play. That's the smart thing to do. I think always is just to not to like be sue happy. Now, if there is no relationship in place, we're not looking to go crazy. But at that point, the lawyers reach out to their lawyers and let them know about the infringement. They share all the information, and then there's at that point we start the negotiations. You're always going to need backup licensing information as well. Like, so if you have a license in place already that established that rate, that's what's
Yeah.
going to get you to close the deal. If you don't have anything, it's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle, and it may not be worth what you're pushing. But obviously, the
Okay. So
tracks that
this
you're
is where you've synced it before, essentially.
yeah, ultimately you want to look at your historical sync data, and have that license in place, and that will justify, hey, we license this for $5,000 for a 1 month use, and this has been on your platform for 12 months, justifying us getting $60,000 of our share.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and sometimes it works out in that way, and sometimes it's a bit more of a negotiation. And typically, I think it looks at all these brands are looking to kind of settle. They don't want to be out in the open. This is not kind of a malicious thing for the most part. So typically, like it takes a few weeks, and then we get paid. And it's not always about the money, like I said. I mean, I'm always looking for a really cool opportunity to like get a brand to do something bigger for some of my writers that I work with, or some of the masters that or the artists that I'm working with directly. Because also part of what I love to do when I'm working with music investors or publishers is just having direct relations with the artist. Like maybe there's something bigger we can do here, and that's always got to be top of mind, because it's not always about bringing up that immediate income that's going to grow the catalog value. It's always about yes, we want to get our value out of this specific opportunity, but we want to make sure that how do we grow this into the future as a partnership as opposed to the alternative, which is a bit more like heavy handed.
Yeah, and I think there's other things on there like moral rights and stuff that come into play with all this because a lot of the reasons that sync is there is so that you can govern the copyright and you don't have to worry about it being used in the brands that that artist doesn't want to be affiliated with. So there's some tricky areas to kind of manage, I guess, around this as well.
Well, imagine how many users some of these platforms have, hundreds of millions of users.
Oh yeah, and the scale challenge is massive. Yeah,
It's ridiculous.
I was about to come on to that. Yeah, so
Yeah, I look at some of these companies I'm talking to and I'm like, it's only a matter of time before you get acquired by some of the bigger guys. And, I think it's hopefully going to evolve into something just like everything in music tech. It's like 5 years ago is nothing like last year, which is, now we're in the AI world. It's a completely different beast. So I do think it's very good. It's going to be an educational thing, and it's also going to probably boast up some of these other platforms that are looking to try to figure out ways to set better rates and make licensing for UGC content a bit more streamlined. Because I just think that it might be easier sometimes, and I hate to say this, ultimately, it might be easier sometimes just to post it and hope that no one finds it. That's kind of probably some of the mentality.
yeah,
And it's which is not the right way to move. I don't subscribe to that, but that could be like it's just a post.
the interface into sync is challenging, isn't it, at times? So
Yeah.
um, yeah, in terms of like advice you'd give to like a music investor fund who's not really like looked into this kind of, I guess, topic before,
Yeah.
what would you say? Like, because it sounds like it's not necessarily like um, it's not a side of desk activity really. It seems to be quite a heavy task. Can be thousands of like infringements to kind of review and like figure out how you're going to tackle each one of those, and like how would you say like the best way to tackle it is?
I mean, I think that to just from the beginning, it's always like, are you a passive or an active? Do you want me to go after all this proactive partnerships in general? So we're down this road, and I think that it really comes down to understanding all the historical deals that are in place because maybe there's an admin, like I said earlier, or maybe there's a license in place that doesn't allow you to do something. So it becomes a bigger partnership. Like there's a catalog I'm working on now where I'm actually speaking to multiple labels, multiple admins on behalf of a client of mine who owns the rights, owns the IP, and it might not be so cracked up to what it is. I mean, I think we leave a lot of money on the table if we go after very small subsets. So I think it's definitely a slow burn. Maybe that's the advice that I give them. It's not immediate impact, but if you can identify a very decent subset, um, we identify maybe those few hundred smaller cases and we can kind of quantify what that looks like. Then it's like, okay, do we want to put my energy towards this?
Yeah, yeah.
And if I could have a small pipeline just clearing these things up in the background, um, I think that it's worth it. But sometimes it depends on, how much you actually own or control.
So generally, like try and filter some of the noise out, I guess, because it might not be worth
Oh,
pursuing,
for
and then
sure.
take a systematic approach to tackling it with a bit of dedicated resource that's going to have to churn through some of these things as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it took me probably almost 2 months to go through all of the data using AI, like going through data and going through all of our historical sync to really identify maybe those few hundred that I wanted to focus on before I even brought it to the client. That's
Yeah,
how,
yeah,
you don't want to get them all excited about something that's not reality. I'm running into some barriers now that I'm really frustrated. Like maybe I should have taken a step back and it's a learning process because this is pretty new for UGC. We never were
yeah,
able
yeah,
to be able to do this because there was always this gray area and when I speak to some of the CEOs that I work with, whether they're publishers or investors, they go, "Oh, I thought that they just didn't realize that there was this gap here that it was just never were able to capture it before." It's kind of shocking to them sometimes, and it's just like, oh, it was just kind of understood to me that it was just really hard, and everyone's trying. Would love to track this stuff day to day, but do you want to hire a team of 10 in the past to just sit on Facebook all day long looking
yeah,
for your music?
exactly. Yeah,
It's very
yeah, yeah,
hard.
yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. I think that when we've spoken before, I've always thought this was a really kind of interesting area, hence why we're doing the podcast, right?
Yeah.
And I think I like your angle with taking a creative approach to tackling some of these conversations because it doesn't have to be a hostile thing, right? A
No,
lot of it
absolutely
is
not.
essentially um, mistakes, being made by some of the brands. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ryan. That was amazing. Thanks so much. Great to speak to you today. I think, it really shows that, just being on top of these things can make a massive difference overall. A lot of these music investors have, large catalogs now, and, it's all about incremental gains. So, yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much for your
Thanks for
time. I
having me.
appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you.